1944, Major von der Heide saw over 800 planes. They were not bombers. They were troop carriers, an entire army falling from the sky. You are with him, on a hill overlooking the Cotentin Peninsula in Normandy. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and fear. For weeks, the German High Command had been expecting this, the invasion, but not like this. Major Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heide commanded the 6th Parachute Regiment. His men were veterans, battle-hardened soldiers who had fought in Crete and Russia. But what they saw that night was not a battle. It was a statistical impossibility. The official Allied records state that 822 C-47 transport planes flew in the first wave alone. Think about that. 822, stretching from one horizon to the other, and an endless river of steel in the moonlight. German intelligence had predicted an attack. They even predicted paratroopers. But they never predicted the scale of this. The reports were dismissed as fantasy. The planes were so numerous, they blotted out the stars. Von der Heide later wrote that the noise was not a roar, but a physical presence, a vibration in his bones that told him something fundamental had shifted in the war. And then, the engines faded, and a new sound began to echo through the fields and hedgerows. It was small, metallic, the sound of a child's toy, a simple metal cricket issued to every man in the 101st Airborne Division. One click was the challenge. 2 clicks in response meant friend. Imagine that. You're in a foreign field, miles behind enemy lines, disoriented, alone. On your only way to find your unit is a sound that carries no more than 20 yards. But the Germans were not stupid. They learned this sound quickly. A single click in the darkness could be a brother in arms, or it could be a trap, a lure into a perfectly staged ambush. Every click became a gamble with your life. For von der Heide, watching from his command post, the individual sounds were lost in the distance. He didn't hear the clicks. He saw the result. He saw an industrial might that Germany could no longer match, an enemy that could afford to darken the sky with its armies. He famously told his adjutant, "This is the end for us." But the official reports don't mention this sense of dread. They focus on troop movements and casualty counts. Here's the part they miss. It wasn't the 800 planes that truly signaled defeat. It wasn't the thousands of men dropping from the sky. It was the sound they made when they landed. A quiet, terrifying little click in the dark. So what was it about that simple sound that told a veteran commander the entire war was already lost? The war was lost because the sound wasn't the threat. It was the idea behind it, an idea that proved his entire world of warfare, of structured battle lines and top-down command, was now obsolete. It was the sound of a ghost army, assembling itself piece by piece in the darkness. To understand his dread, you have to understand what the Germans expected. They had built Fortress Europe, the Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile line of concrete and steel designed by the organization taught to repel any sea invasion. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, a man who understood the battlefield, had reinforced it feverishly. He ordered millions of mines laid on the beaches. He had giant steel barricades, called Czech hedgehogs, planted in the surf. He even designed his own gruesome invention, angled poles tipped with mines, planted in every open field. They called it Rommel's spargel, Rommel's asparagus, designed to impale Allied gliders and their occupants. Think about that. They were the most expensive front door lock in history. while the enemy was simply planning to fly over the wall and land in the living room. Here's the part nobody likes to admit. The German High Command was fooled completely. The British had created an elaborate deception, Operation Fortitude, centered on a phantom army group under General George S. Patton. They used inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, and double agents to convince Berlin the real invasion would come at the Pas de Calais, the shortest point across the Channel. And Hitler believed it. The German 15th Army, a force of nearly 250,000 men, sat 150 miles away from Normandy. They were waiting for a ghost invasion that would never arrive. Official documents, declassified decades later, show just how successful the deception was. The intelligence flowing to Berlin was a fantasy, a lie they wanted to believe. And so, the real army fell from the sky into the one place they were least expected. The American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne were not meant to fight a conventional battle. Their job was to create chaos, to become a virus in the German nervous system. Your mission wasn't to take a hill, it was to seize a single wooden bridge, or to cut a specific telephone line connecting a command post to an artillery battery. The 101st Airborne's primary objective was to secure 4 causeways leading inland from Utah Beach. These were narrow, elevated roads across intentionally flooded marshland. Without those causeways, the 4th Infantry Division landing by sea would be trapped on a tiny sliver of sand, annihilated. That little metal cricket wasn't just a tool for finding a friend, it was an instrument for orchestrating a symphony of chaos. Major von der Heide understood this instantly. He was the commander of Germany's own 6th Parachute Regiment. He knew what he was looking at. He wasn't seeing an army. He was seeing a new philosophy of war, an enemy that trusted its individual soldiers to think, to adapt, to form small groups and complete a mission with no officer present. All while his own panzer divisions, the most powerful armored forces in the world, sat idle. They couldn't move without a direct order from Adolf Hitler's headquarters, an order that took hours to come. It was a catastrophic failure. But not of the men in the bunkers. It was a failure of imagination. But here's the part the official histories often smooth over. From a military perspective, the Allied airborne drop was a complete disaster. Young pilots flying into a storm of anti-aircraft fire for the first time panicked. They flew too fast and too high. They dropped their men miles off target, scattered across 25 square miles of hostile territory. Some men from the 101st landed right on top of German garrisons. Others drowned in the flooded fields, dragged down by 100 pounds of gear. Instead of organized companies, the Germans faced 1,000 different firefights against angry, isolated groups of men fighting for their lives. So you have a German command system frozen in confusion, and an Allied invasion plan shattered into 1,000 pieces on impact. In that absolute chaos, with both armies effectively blind, how is a battle like that even won? Battle like that even won? The answer is, it isn't. Not in the way generals draw lines on a map. It's won by inches, by blood, and by the dirt under your fingernails. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the battlefield itself. This was not open country. This was Normandy's infamous bocage. And if you're picturing simple garden hedges, think again. These were ancient earthen walls, some over 1,000 years old. They stood 3, sometimes 4 meters high. Thick, dense, and tangled with trees whose roots went back centuries. Each field was a green-walled fortress, a natural coffin. For the scattered American paratroopers, it was a maze, a labyrinth with a German machine gun waiting around every single corner. The official military term is channelizing terrain, a sterile phrase for a simple, brutal fact. The hedgerows forced you into predictable paths, straight into kill zones. The Germans had been occupying this land for 4 years. They knew every path, every gap, every ditch. They had turned the landscape itself into a weapon. And here's where the chaos of the drop became a strange, paradoxical advantage for the Allies. Because the Germans were fighting ghosts. A handful of men would fire from one hedgerow and then vanish. Another group would attack a crossroads 2 miles away. There were no front lines, only 1,000 points of lethal contact. The German response was textbook. Dig in, set up interlocking fields of fire with their MG-42 machine guns, and wait for orders. But the orders never came. The German high command was still paralyzed, convinced the real invasion was 150 miles away at the Pas de Calais. Yet the history books often stop there. They don't talk about the consequence. So you have elite German soldiers, perfectly positioned, waiting for a phone to ring that will remain silent, while 1,000 individual battles are being fought by desperate American soldiers with no plan other than survival. Consider the actions of one man, First Lieutenant Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. On the morning of June 6th, Winters found himself with just 12 men from various units. His company was scattered to the winds. His objective was a mystery. Then he heard it, the deep rhythmic thump of German artillery. 4 105mm howitzers firing directly onto Utah Beach, where thousands of American soldiers were wading ashore into a storm of steel. The guns had to be silenced. There was no time for a plan. No time for reinforcements. There was only now. The position was located at a farm called Brecourt Manor. The guns were protected by approximately 50 German soldiers from the 6th Parachute Regiment, dug into a sophisticated network of trenches. 13 men against 50, in a fixed fortification. The odds were suicidal. And this is where it gets interesting. Winters didn't attack the guns. He attacked the system. He used the Germans' own trenches against them. He placed 2 machine guns for covering fire. Then he sent small teams, one by one, crawling through the hedgerows and leaping directly into the trench system. Imagine the shock. You're a German gunner focused on the beach miles away, and suddenly an American soldier appears inside your trench. 10 feet from you, they took the first gun, then the second. They used captured German machine guns to attack the next position. It was a symphony of controlled violence, a masterpiece of small unit tactics born from pure necessity. The assault on Brecourt Manor took hours. By the end, Winters and his small force had destroyed all 4 guns, killed 15 German soldiers, and wounded many more. They suffered 4 casualties. This single action silenced the guns raining death on Utah Beach. It saved hundreds, perhaps thousands, of lives. But that is not the most important thing they found there. Read that sentence again. Destroying the artillery wasn't the most important discovery. In the German command post, one of Winters' men found a map. It was pristine, perfectly detailed. It showed every single German artillery and machine gun position on the entire Utah Beach sector of the Cottonton Peninsula. Think about what that means. They had just stumbled upon the German defensive playbook for the entire region. It was an intelligence failure on a colossal scale for the Germans. and a windfall for the Allies. This one piece of paper would redirect Allied artillery and bombing runs for weeks, saving thousands more lives. And here is the dark irony. The men of Easy Company fought a desperate, bloody battle to take out 4 guns, and in doing so, they found the key to taking out all of them. Yet the official after-action report, the one filed by Winters himself, focuses almost entirely on the destruction of the battery. The map is mentioned almost as an afterthought. It makes you wonder, what else was found in those trenches that was never reported? And why would an intelligence discovery of that magnitude be buried so deep in a field report? Why would a soldier bury a priceless intelligence find in a field report? The answer is simpler and far more human than any conspiracy. The report wasn't written by an intelligence analyst in a quiet room miles from the fighting. It was written by a man whose entire world had shrunk to the next hedgerow, the next burst of machine gun fire. For Lieutenant Winters, the map was an abstraction. The 4 cannons killing his brothers on the beach. That was real. The paper was an afterthought. The blood was the story. And while Winters fought for inches of French mud, Major von der Heydt fought a different battle. A battle against the crushing weight of reality. From his command post at the Château de Berneville, he tried to assemble a coherent picture from 100 panicked reports. Ghosts in the hedgerows. Attacks on bridges that weren't on his maps. An enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at once. Think about what he heard. The distant rhythmic thump of naval guns. The stutter of a German MG-42 answering a phantom threat. Then, silence. He had to build a picture of the invasion from these fragments, these echoes of violence. Years later, von der Heydt wrote about the unbelievable bravery of the American paratroopers. This wasn't post-war propaganda. It was a professional soldier's honest assessment of his enemy. And what an enemy it was. Imagine this for a moment. You are Private John Steele of the 82nd Airborne. Your drop zone is the town square of Sainte-Mère-Église, but you miss. Your parachute snags on the ancient stone steeple of the town church. You hang there, helpless, 20 meters in the air, a perfect target. Below you, the battle for the town rages. You see the muzzle flashes. You hear the screams in German and English. You are shot in the foot. You decide your only hope is to play dead. For 2 hours, you hang limp in your harness, a living scarecrow watching the war unfold beneath you. This is the reality of D-Day. It wasn't about lines on a map. It was about thousands of individual stories like this. Moments of sheer terror, blind luck, and impossible choices. The history books call the German belief that the invasion would land at Pas-de-Calais a grand delusion. And it was. A catastrophic intelligence failure. But maybe the bigger delusion was on the Allied side. The belief that this chaotic, scattered, almost suicidal drop could ever be called a plan. The real plan was the individual soldier. A man trusted to find a way, any way, to complete his mission. For Major von der Heydt, this truth was inescapable. The delusion of a German victory shattered for him before the sun even rose on June 6th. He saw the industrial might of America darkening his skies. He understood in his bones that Germany had already lost the war of production, the war of logistics, the war of numbers. He knew it was over. And here is the part that is truly terrifying. He knew the war was lost, but he still had to fight it. His 6th Parachute Regiment was one of the most elite units in the German army. They would fight on for another 11 brutal months. Every single day, he had to look his men in the eye. men he had trained with, shared meals with, and order them into a battle he knew they could not win. He had to send them to die, knowing it was all for nothing. So what do you say to a man you are about to send to his death in a war that is already lost? You are about to send to his death in a war that is already lost. You say what duty requires. You speak of honor, of the fatherland. Then you give the order, and you try not to look them in the eye for too long. For Major von der Heide, June 6, 1944, was the end. But the dying continued for another 337 days. His 6th Parachute Regiment fought with savage professionalism through the hedgerows of Normandy. They fought in the frozen forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, but they were fighting against a mathematical certainty, a tide of steel. For every German tank knocked out, the Allies produced 10 more. For every soldier who fell, 3 more were waiting on a ship to take his place. Think about that. You are fighting an enemy that can replace its losses faster than you can count them. And what of the grand deception, the Phantom Army at Pas-de-Calais? The official histories celebrate Operation Fortitude as a stroke of genius. But here's the part they don't discuss. For weeks after D-Day, Adolf Hitler refused to release the German 15th Army. He was still waiting for a ghost invasion that would never come. He clung to the story he wanted to be true, while his real army was being bled white in Normandy. It's a detail few reports emphasize. The German High Command was defeated by a better story. Major von der Heide was finally captured on Christmas Eve, 1944, near Monschau. Exhausted and suffering from pneumonia, he had become separated from his men and simply knocked on a farmhouse door to surrender. He survived the war. He would go on to help build the new German army, the Bundeswehr, and serve in Parliament. But what of the thousands of men who followed his orders after that dawn in Normandy? The men who fought and died in a war their commander knew was hopeless? The war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945. The great machine of destruction finally ground to a halt. The inevitable dawn arrived. But it was not a sunrise of heroes and villains. It was the cold, gray light revealing a continent in ruins, a world burned clean of its old certainties. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of the chaos, stories of good versus evil, of clear-cut victory and defeat. But the truth is almost always messier. Von der Heide knew the war was lost on June 6, 1944.